let's get started. Thank you so much, Ellen. I appreciate that. So feel free as I'm going through this to continue with sharing where you're joining from and what you teach. But we're going to get started on this subject session. So we're going to talk about teaching languages using Quizlet. And I'm going to be talking about multimodality and language teaching, which I know is a hot topic these days. And if you are interested in this topic, I'm going to say this again at the end. Right after this session, I'm actually hosting a panel of experts on multimodality. So if you want to check that out, it should be really fun. And again, as I'm talking, feel free to use the chat for that. If you have questions for me, though, please do not put the questions in the chat. Put those questions in the Q&A. The Q&A is what I'll be moderating and looking for questions. I am going to save about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So as you're asking questions throughout the session and I don't answer them, please don't be alarmed because I will get to them at the end. And I will also share my contact information at the end. So if you have questions after this presentation, please feel free to reach out via email, via Twitter, via Insta, whatever works for you. And I will get to your question as soon as I can. Awesome. Okay. So a little bit about me first. Hi, my name is Maureen Lamb. I am the Dean of Faculty, the Dean of Academic Technology and Innovative Pedagogy, and a Latin teacher at the Ethel Walker School in Simsbury, Connecticut. I love it there. It's a girls plus school. We have all female identifying, non-binary and non-traditional genders. It's a wonderful place. I love being there. And I'm the Latin teacher, which is great because I get to know the students in such a different way. I know I'm a singleton and some people are don't enjoy being a singleton. I actually love it because I get to see all those students through the ages and see them grow and learn as students. And so for me, it's really, really cool. And I love seeing that their language journey over the years, because that's really what it is. It's a journey. It's a process. I think that no one would ever say, the language journey is over. No, we're always constantly learning and evolving. I've been studying Latin for 23 years, and I would say I am still on my language journey with Latin and ancient Greek. Even my journey with English, I would say we're always can be learning more. English is my first language. So I really appreciate the power of a tool like Quizlet to help support my students. And one thing I've been saying about Quizlet for many years, and that I will continue to say about Quizlet, is that I think Quizlet is one of the best options for multimodal learning. And that is really helping support students to create a more inclusive classroom environment by providing multimodality for the Quizlet sets. I know this is kind of one-on-one information, but I've got this in every session yesterday. A Quizlet set is just the groups of terms and definitions. So I just wanted to be super clear with what I'm talking about here. And so the multimodality is what I really like about it. Unlike traditional flashcards, where you just flip over a card, and sometimes there can be things like pictures, you can have all sorts of different things in these flashcards. There's audio support, there's picture support, there's Qchat, which I'll talk a little bit about, which I'm doing a session on later today. If you want to come by, there are such cool things for language teachers. It's really cool. There's rich text so that you can highlight text, you can bolden text for students, and there are different ways to share and to review sets. So I think there are so many really cool options here, and we're going to dive into just a few of them. But again, if you have questions, please let me know. And someone just asked, what is multimodality? So I will answer that one live. Great question. And if you haven't heard of it, you've probably heard of the concept. And so the idea of, I will get into this in a second, actually. Multimodality is using multiple modals, meaning, so for example, a mode might be speaking, a mode might be listening. I think as language teachers, we try to engage the senses as much as possible. We try to have kinesthetic activities. We try to have spoken activities. We try to have visual aids for students. We try to engage our students with as many senses as possible so that they can acquire this knowledge, so that the language can go into their long-term memory and really become a part of them in this language journey. And so I think that when you're thinking multimodal, think about engaging more than one of the senses at a time. So maybe you're seeing something and you're saying something. Maybe you're seeing something and listening to something. There's a lot of different options here. So that's a great question, and I'm glad I could clarify that right away. And so one of the things I really like about Quizlet is I find that, especially for my students who are diverse, it's extremely inclusive. It provides a lot of the support that my students need in language learning. So for example, I have some students that really have a tough time if they're not hearing language. And one of the great things about using a Quizlet flashcard set is that you can record your voice. You can have a Quizlet recording of a voice speaking a language, so the students can hear while they are doing flashcards, while they are reviewing, while they're doing these things. You can add pictures, you could add photos. There's a lot of different options. And I think that one of the cool things is that when you are being inclusive and you are trying to accommodate neurodiversity, all students benefit from this. I would say that my students, since we started using Quizlet many years ago, have benefited so much, especially in terms of vocabulary retention. I think the opportunities for students to not only review as a class, but to review on their own using a tool like Quizlet has remarkably contributed to the growing of their vocabulary, more learned words, and more acquired words. And the difference, I think, between learning and acquiring a word is you learn a word, you kind of know what it means. When you see it, you recognize it. But when you acquire it, you really know that word. That word is in your long-term memory. That word has become a part of you. And so that's what I mean by the difference between those things. And so when we center those students who are neurodiverse by using inclusive practices, all students benefit. And so multimodal language is conveying meaning through the combination of two or more modes. So there can be different visual ways of doing this. So a picture and highlighting, you can do, that's two different visual modes you can use. You can use speaking and listening, for interpersonal skills. I know I'm kind of hitting on some of the actual things here, but that's something to think about. And again, I'm seeing some questions coming up. If you have a question, feel free to throw it in the Q&A. I will get to it at the end. Or if I don't get to it, you could absolutely reach out about it. So again, you're wanting to combine two or more modes. Some of the students really enjoy more of a kinesthetic mode, and we'll talk about what your options are here using Quizlet. And again, multimodal, multisensory. I don't think it can convey smell, but it can do touch with the kinesthetic ideas. You can do spoken and speaking, listening. You can do the sight, and you can do hearing. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this. And I heard this years ago, and I can't remember to attribute it right now, who I heard it from, but the idea of doing something multimodal is, to be inclusive, is kind of like having a playground that looks like this. This playground is awesome. Lots of different kids can use this playground. It has a ramp, which is great for students that might need a ramp. It has a climbing thing, it has a slide, but many students can use and enjoy this playground. Just like when you're using accommodating things like visual support, listening support, those things are super helpful for certain students, and everyone can use it, have fun, and benefit from it. And that's something that I think is really important. And so Quizlet has so many multimodal options. We are going to talk about them, especially as it benefits language learners in particular. But if you have questions that are beyond language learning, that's okay too. Feel free to ask questions. And so the first one I want to talk about is the auditory options. And here we have the symbol of the different characters and the symbol of listening. So one of the cool parts about Quizlet is it actually has language recognition. So without me even telling Quizlet that I was typing in Latin, it recognized this as the Latin language, which was really, really cool. So as I started typing in Chiron fortun rex centurorum erat, it figured out that that was Latin. And then when I wrote Chiron was the brave king of the centaurs, it recognized that as English. So right away, it labels that for students. And I think that's really, really helpful for them to see. You can also, so recognizing lots of different languages is really important. And you can do a language search to search for whatever language is. So let's say it recognizes it as something, but you want it to be something else. So for example, I teach ancient Greek and it recognized my ancient Greek as modern Greek. Ancient Greek is unfortunately not an option, but one of the cool things it did do was when it recognized it as Greek, it popped up a Greek keyboard for me to use. So I was able to use that in order to create Greek characters. So I was copying and pasting from another thing that I was using to create Greek characters, but I could also use Quizlet itself to do Greek characters, which was really nice. And so for special symbols and things like that, for languages that have different characters, there are resources for that. So that's something that's really helpful. And like I said, you can add the special characters. These are the special characters for Latin that pop up. Again, it has recognized that this is the Latin language, and it has already provided me with the special characters that I might need. Here you can see the special characters have macrons. For Greek, it provides me with the Greek alphabet as the special characters. Really, it depends on what language you're using. I know that these pop up for French, for Spanish, and that they are really, really helpful. This is also helpful if students are making Quizlet sets. Oftentimes, my students will make Quizlet sets and then share them to our class. You can toggle that feature on and off if you want students to share to a class or not. And so when they make it, it's helpful that they can use these special characters so that they can write in the language. There are 2 recording options you can use. As a Latin and ancient Greek teacher and as a Quizlet Plus member, I like to record my own language, and this is so easy. All you do is you go to the record and then you press the space bar. It's super easy. And then as you're pressing the space bar, it is recording your voice. And if you take your finger off the space bar and stop pressing it, it stops recording, which is really, really helpful. Another option, and again, unfortunately, this is not someone that works for ancient Greek and Latin, but you can actually listen to Quizlet examples of audio. And so Quizlet has some audio pre-recorded that it will pop up for whatever you're doing. It will say it in the target language, which is really cool. So you might not even have to record it. Another thing that came up yesterday and has come up before is, can you use this for listening exercises? And my answer would be absolutely. So you don't necessarily have to record what is on the term or definition. You can ask a question or something like that, and then have a series of, you can have the recording be something different. So it doesn't have to necessarily be what you're putting in the term or definition when you're recording it, if that makes sense. So usually these are linked to a term or definition. So it will definitely be linked to a term or definition, but you don't have to record exactly what that says if you want to do something like a further explanation or something like that. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about visual options. And there are a lot of visual options, some newer ones too, if you haven't checked them out. The biggest one is probably adding things from the internet. This is something that we do all the time when we're looking for something. And so what we can do here is, for example, I put in this Latin text, "Hic homine satisrapto garamanti de nympha," and then it was translated as this one born from, this is how I translated it anyway, with the Garamantian nymph having been snatched. But when I put this English text in, it was not finding the image that went with that English text. It was confused. And so then what you can do is you can just put in your own English text to figure out what you're looking for, or whatever text the target language is in. And then it will find the image that you're looking for. So here I took that long phrase, I put in Amun, and they were able to find a picture that worked for what I was looking for. The other option too, if you are a Quizlet Plus member, is to upload your own image. So if you have an image on your desktop or something like that that you want to upload, you can upload it here. Another thing that I like to do is an app smash. So if I want to make my own image, what I will do is I'll go into Google Drawing and maybe I'll do a little like collaged image. Again, these images are not huge, so maybe it's like two different things together or three, but you can do your own collage image and then upload it too, if that's what you want to do. There's no image editing options here, so you have to do the editing outside it, but you can upload an edited image that you have access to. Excuse me, my goodness. Another thing you can do with the app, which I find extremely helpful, is you can, oh, gracias. I have a lot of people saying bless you. Thank you. That's so kind. You can add photos from the app. And so this is really cool. I use this with diagrams all the time. And if you have not checked out diagrams, I'm not going to get deep into diagrams in this, but I did a session yesterday on diagrams. So if you want to go to Zoom events, you can check out the recording of the diagrams yesterday. I have a lot of different options and a lot of them are relevant to language teaching. I have maps, charts, all sorts of stuff. And so what you can do with the app, the Quizlet app on your phone, is you can scan something. That can be an image, that can be taking a photo of something. You can even scan notes or worksheets or documents or things like that, and you can upload them, which is really fun. Sometimes students will upload photos of themselves doing things to act things out. I have one student in particular who loves to do this. And so that's a really fun option for students, especially if they're creating Quizlet sets, that if they want to share that, they can absolutely do that. And so that's really fun. And they will edit the image slightly and then they'll upload it to act out whatever's going on. And so it's a fun way to customize it. And again, students love using their phones. So if they're allowed to use their phones, like absolutely, they can take photos with this if they have a Quizlet app. Diagrams are what I was talking about before. I love diagrams. I have a more in-depth presentation on diagrams if you want to check it out. Diagrams are a Quizlet Plus feature. And so this is from an older textbook. We have this image of a Roman bathhouse. And what I've been going over with my students is the different rooms within the bathhouse. I think as language teachers, a lot of times we do different rooms within this building. Maybe it's a house, maybe it's an apartment, maybe it's a shopping mall. We have a lot of different things that we talk to our students about. And so for this one, what I did was I have the different rooms of the Roman bath. And a neat feature is that unlike with images, when you're using diagrams, you can edit the image itself. And so I actually use the image editing tools within Quizlet to edit this diagram. And so what I did was I used the blurring feature. And so I blurred out all of this information that was going to give my students all of the answers. And then I blurred out all the different names of the rooms. And then every time you see one of these circles are connected to a term and definition within the set. And so the term and definition will be the name of the room and the definition of that room, what that function of that room is. So for example, we have the changing room. And so when we have the changing room, the apoditerium, then it would say apoditerium, changing room. It might say hot room, caldarium, or something like that. And so students should be able to figure it out by looking at it and by our discussions that we've talked about. But diagrams are a really fun option to review things with students in the target language. Next, we're going to talk, and again, I see that there are a lot of questions. I promise I will leave time at the end for questions. I will get to your questions, and if I don't, please email me and I'm happy to help. There are a lot of text enhancement options, and I think this can be really fun for a lot of different reasons. I think you can do something like this, which is sentence diagramming. So you would have here, I've highlighted in pink the subject. I've highlighted in blue this object of the preposition apud cantikos, and I've also highlighted in yellow eramus and bolded it. And so that's a cool way for my students to be able to see the different function of things within the sentence and then ask something in the definition about what's going on in that sentence. And one of the things I really like that makes this inclusive is I like the way that Quizlet has chosen its highlighter colors, because for a lot of my students who have trouble differentiating colors, these are 3 colors that they are not going to have trouble with. But I would always say, check in with your students, see what works for them, and see how you can best support them when it comes to color coding. But something like color coding has really made a difference for my students. Also, what I do is if I'm asking a question about a bit of text, I might highlight or bolden the part of the text that I'm asking the question about while giving a more text, because I want to make sure that when I am asking my students questions about a text, it is contextualized as much as possible. You can also do this with diagrams. If you look at my, again, previous video, I talk a little bit about how you can do a literary analysis using a diagram by taking a picture of the text that you want students to analyze and then asking questions about certain points in the text. Because you can't just, you can do the circles, but you can also do rectangles and more irregular shapes within diagrams to ask questions about. So it actually is a wonderful tool for analyzing passages. And so being able to put that passage up as a diagram and ask questions underneath is a great way for students to review. One last way I do that is I actually will put whatever kind of worksheet they did for homework. Maybe they're doing an AP Latin worksheet and they have a series of multiple choice questions that they want to go over. What I'll do is I have a Quizlet Plus account, so I will actually put the multiple choice questions and answers into that set. And I will ask students to go over that and do that set as a way to review their homework answers so they can see what they got wrong and what they got right and really have a better sense of what they're finding challenging and what they're finding success with. So I think diagrams are a super powerful tool. I think rich text formatting, again, is a super powerful tool, and you can do a lot of things to make the text stand out more for students. Qchat is a new feature which I absolutely love. I've been playing around with it. If you follow me on social media, you know I'm loving AI right now. And this is just one of my favorite new AI tools. I think one of the coolest things about this is not only is this embedded within Quizlet, but it tells students in every place where you can type things, please don't put any personal information. Where I have found that students have been having a lot of trouble with AI is AI taking a lot of their personal information. Qchat is not like that. Qchat's not like that at all. Yeah, students are encouraged not to do that. And it is a study tool. Qchat, unlike other AI, is really a tutor. So it's another experience that students can have to help them review things. And so this is an example of what happens when I pull up Qchat and my students have been studying the route of Hannibal. Here they were looking at a diagram that was a map of Hannibal's journey from Carthage up through Spain, across the Alps and down into Italy. And so each of the dots was a place along the way, and we were talking about each of the definitions was what happened in those places. And so here it noticed that this was in Latin. And so it gave me options for Quiz Me, where it would ask me a multiple choice question related to the set. Story mode, which was brilliant. What it did was it used the Latin from the Quizlet set and it created a story in Latin. Not only did it create a story, it created a comprehensible story that's grammar was really good. So my students could have easily understood this story and answered questions about it. It was really cool. And another one was practice with sentences. And so when I used this, I went in and for a couple of the sentences, I did the right thing. And so it gave me a lot of positive affirmation. But then for a sentence, I wrote the wrong answer on purpose. One hopes I know Latin by now. And so I wrote it on purpose and then it gave me feedback, but it was really positive critical feedback. It was really affirming. And it also helped me to understand how and why I got that sentence wrong in the Latin. So that was super helpful for me. And I think my students were just starting to play with this at the end of the year. And it was really cool. I think it was really fun and they were enjoying it because I think there are a lot of different games. There are a lot of different things that students can use on Quizlet. But this is one of the ways that Quizlet keeps adapting and evolving to really support students in different ways. And I appreciate that Qchat has turned into something that can really support students that need that one-on-one kind of feedback, which is great. I think if my students were studying for something, this would be a great way for them to review in a way that's a little bit different. Let's say they've already done the flashcards, they've already done Learn, and let's say they already did Match, which they absolutely loved. If you have students that love things that are kind of a little bit competitive in time and they want to do something on their own, they should try Match, because you're dropping and dragging. And especially for my students who have a touch screen, it's a very satisfying kinesthetic experience. But there are some students who want a little bit more or need further explanation. And that's where Qchat becomes a very powerful tool. And so if you want to learn more, I have a session that's all about Qchat later today. And a lot of my examples come from my Latin classroom. So please feel free to come by that. And not least at all is going to be the power of play. I use Quizlet Live and Quizlet Checkpoint in my classroom all the time. I think that Quizlet Live is great. I'm going to explain the difference just briefly. Quizlet Live is competitive. Students are trying to get the 12 right in a row, basically, and get it quicker than their colleagues. And so they do it very fast. This can be done in groups. This can be done individually. And so students are, in essence, answering multiple choice questions to try to get to the endpoint quicker. Now, Checkpoint's a little bit different. Checkpoint is individual, and students, again, are answering 12 questions, but they're all answering them at the same time. So then they get feedback on what the correct answer is as they're doing it. Now, they're going to get feedback on the right or wrong answer quickly in Quizlet Live, but Checkpoint is more of that formative feedback check-in. It really gives a good sense. And at the end of Checkpoint, you get a sense as a teacher of what your students really know and what they don't know in a way that's really, really helpful. I love using Checkpoint right before we take an assessment. I love using it when I'm preparing reviews, just so I can know what my students are finding success with and where I can support them, what they're finding challenging. And so by using these two tools, oftentimes I'll use Quizlet Live as either a brain break or a way to start class, and Checkpoint's a really good kind of formative feedback check, maybe at the end of class or even at the beginning of the next class to see what they retained from the previous class. And you get to see individuals, how individuals are doing within the class. So you'll get to see a kind of a range. So maybe 90% of the class gets things right, or maybe only 80%. And then you get to see what they got right and wrong. And so that feedback, especially as a language teacher, can be extremely powerful. And I think the more kind of formative check-ins we can have with students, the better, especially when it's a little bit lower pressure. My students know if we're playing Quizlet Live or Checkpoint, that's not meant to be graded. That's not something I'm grading for my students, but it's something that can inform me as their teacher what students need. And I think that's what makes them such powerful tools. And of course, who doesn't like to play? Who doesn't like to make it so that it's fun for students and they're having a little bit of fun with the competition? And again, some students aren't into it, and there are lots of different options on Quizlet, but my students tend to really enjoy the playful modes. And so this is an example of Checkpoint. I know people tend to be more familiar with Quizlet Live, so I wanted to show a little bit about what Checkpoint is. So as a teacher, what you do is you can select 12 questions, or you can start with 12 random questions, depending on what you want to do. And then those will ask the students questions. And so I like using multiple choice questions with my students. This one's obviously a translation. We've got the Latin to English, but there's lots of different ways you can do this. And you have a lot of options too. You can answer with the term or definition. And this one's really important. You can turn the leaderboard on and off. So my students, some classes really like that leaderboard. It's very motivating for them to have a leaderboard where they can see who the top 3 folks are. But other classes, that's not as motivating for them. And so I will turn that leaderboard off. Another thing is you can allow students to join late. And I know you can't using every tech tool. So it's really nice to allow students to join a little bit late. If they come to class late, if they can't make it for some reason, that way they're not just sitting there while the rest of the class is playing a game. So I think that's a really fun option to have. And for classic Quizlet, it's really nice because you can choose between random teams or individuals. And when you're doing random teams, you have the different, it's just kind of nice. It gives students an opportunity to get to know each other. And I think that's really cool. I think that's really important. that they can learn to work together and work towards a common goal like that. It's fun, but oftentimes they like individual too. And so it's nice. And also it sometimes when you're doing random teams, it'll force them to change seats a little bit. And it's nice to switch things up once in a while. I love opportunities for my students to stand up during the day and move around because they don't get that opportunity a lot. So if they have to get up and move to where their partners are, that's a really fun thing to do. And again, I use Quizlet all the time for language activation and language focused brain breaks. And so I do this in a lot of different ways. I could say, okay, everyone take a few minutes. You're going to work on Quizlet and give students a lot of choice in what modes they're using. Now, something that's a really powerful tool for language teachers and all teachers really on Quizlet is the idea of creating a Quizlet class. So what I do as someone who has a Quizlet teacher account is I create a class for each of my classes each year. And I put sets in those classes for students to use. And if you sign up students for those classes, if you put their emails in as members, they can use Learn and Test for free with the sets you put in those classes. And so that's a really wonderful opportunity for them. Also, if they're going into their Quizlet class to do that, you can see which sets they've reviewed and how they reviewed. You can see if they use flashcards. You can see if they use Learn or Test or matching. And so you can keep track of who's doing what. And maybe you get a student who doesn't do as well on assessment. And then you look in, you see they have not reviewed their Quizlet sets at all. And so then you can suggest like, oh, maybe you want to try reviewing your Quizlet sets, or maybe you want to try doing this. That's something that you can do there. And maybe you have a specific activity you know they'll love. Maybe they're very kinesthetic and you'll say, oh, I think you would love using matching with this Quizlet set. That's a really cool option. And so making sure that when you have those sets, you're creating classes for them so that students can take advantage of those opportunities. Another thing that is really cool about creating a class is that you can use same activities each year. So what I do is I create a file for my different classes. So my class for next year, for example, will be Latin 1, 2023-2024. That's how my naming convention works. But all of the Quizlet sets that I used last year with my Latin 1 class will be in a file labeled Latin 1. And it's super easy when you have those files to every year transfer those sets from that file to that class. And so that's a really great opportunity to save the stuff that you're doing and not reinvent the wheel and create a new class each year so that it has the members from your current class. So that's my pro tip there for using class. And again, for the review mode options, let's go over those really quickly. I know I promised I'd save some time for questions. I will save 10 minutes. I'm just going to take another minute to go over this. And so just briefly to go over what the review mode options are, flashcards are traditional flip class flashcards. So you have term definition. Now, the thing that's a little bit more is you can add audio, you can add pictures and stuff like that, but they are more traditional flashcards. Learn is review until you know. So the cards come up more frequently that you got wrong, so you can learn those and so that you're getting more repetition of those. Testing is test yourself, and you can print the tests. I think that's really cool. You can also print sets again, which is amazing. And so you've been able to do that for a while now. So using test can be a really cool opportunity to create a practice test for students or a practice assessment that they can do on their own. And it's something that you can actually print. And matching is that speed review I talked about. This is where you can drag and drop matching terms and definitions. And again, when you add different Quizlet sets to a class, the students who are members of that class can use Learn and Test with those sets for free. So there's a big advantage to creating these classes and adding sets to these classes for students. Another thing that's been really ramping up the last few months is expert solutions. I teach with the Cambridge Latin course, and the Cambridge Latin books are all in there, but there are 2.5 billion questions and lots of different textbooks on there. And so it's really cool if you want to look it up and see if your textbook is linked there, because it can go over it can give short explanations for how to do different things within the textbook. And it's become much more robust. So I would definitely check it out and see if you are using a textbook if that textbook is provided in expert solutions. So take a look and see what you think and see if that was something that could help your students. All right. Like I promised, 10 minutes for questions. I'm gonna have to pop off pretty quickly at 1:30, but I would just want to thank you for being here before I get to the questions. If you want to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter, I think, what is it, X now, at Latin Tech Tools. I'm on Instagram, Latin Tech Tools. And if you have a question for me and I don't get to it, my email is latintechtools@gmail.com, and I will get to your I'll get to your question eventually. All right, let's get into the Q&A now. Let's see. Oh, interesting. So an anonymous attendee asked, any thoughts on Quizlet for vocabulary acquisition in 2 to 4 years of language study? I definitely use Quizlet to support student language acquisition. And I think that keeping track of sets over time that students have learned is really cool. I also would say that using those sets, putting the sets in the class really helps students to know what they need to review. A lot of my students have the app on their phone. And so then when they're reviewing those vocab sets or those translation sets or whatever they are, they can take it with them on their phone and review from anywhere. I have students telling me that they review on the bus on the way home from games, or they're reviewing in their car while their parent drives home, something like that. And so it's a really neat way for students to do that. Someone asked, are these features only available with Quizlet Plus? I've tried to indicate where these features are available that are Quizlet Plus, but if you have more questions about this, if you look it up, you can see the features that are primarily Quizlet Plus. For example, diagrams are Quizlet Plus, uploading your own pictures and recording your own audio are Quizlet Plus. So that's something to keep in mind. Someone asked, is it possible to add long audio? Not super long. I've done up to 30 seconds and it's been okay. I'm not sure how long it actually goes, but I would definitely experiment with it. Someone asked if you could, okay. Someone asked, when students are studying flashcards, how can you have the audio play while the flashcards play? Okay. So you can turn the audio on when you're going through flashcards. And so I would have students make sure that they are doing it. It said that sometimes they hear the English instead of Spanish. Make sure they're clicking on the Spanish audio. There should be a little button they can click on to hear that audio. It should be the microphone button. So make sure they're clicking on the correct one. Let's see. Someone asked if students can make a copy of their set and change the images. They can. I do not believe they can do that with a free account, but they can. I also think that another cool thing is if you create a class and students have sets that they want to share, you can actually turn on sharing so that students can share their sets with the whole class if they want. And I've had classes where students are super proud of their Quizlet sets they made and they really wanted to share with the whole class. I've had other classes where they don't want to share, and that's okay. But it can be an option if you want, which is really cool. Good question. Let's see. I'm just seeing here. Oh, this is something I should have mentioned about Qchat. I'm getting a bunch of questions about Qchat. And again, I'm presenting on that later today, so feel free to come by that session. Depending on which type of set you're using. So for example, if I'm doing a language set, I'm going to get different practice opportunities from Qchat than if I were studying a set on biology or geography or something like that. So which features appear and which different activities you can do with Qchat depends on the content of the set that you're using. I hope that makes sense. Someone asked, is checkpoint like an exit ticket or entrance ticket? That's a good question. And I would say it can be both. Yeah, it can be both an exit ticket or an entrance ticket. So I like to use it as an exit ticket if I'm using it at the end of class, just to make sure that students understood what we went over, but I really like using it too as an entrance ticket, just to make sure students understood what we went over the day before, or it's great after a weekend, just to see, okay, how much do you remember from what we went over last time? So that's something that's really important. Someone asked, can you see how long students spend working in Quizlet? No, but you can see when they last interacted with it. So if I have a student who hasn't touched Quizlet and it's like, you haven't been on Quizlet in a month and they're not doing so well in their assessments and they haven't really been doing a review, then I know, oh, okay, well, maybe I should send them back in there to check it. And so, and maybe recommend activities for them. I think sometimes it can be really helpful for students to get that directive of, why don't you go on Quizlet and try some matching? Or why don't you go in and try some flashcards or learn? I think that can be really helpful to give them some guidance as to what they should be doing in Quizlet, because there are a lot of different options. But if you know a certain option works for students, why not recommend it? Ooh, great question. Someone says, what is the difference between a file and a class? Great question. So a class is something that you are sharing with students. So this is something where you are creating a class, putting sets in it, and then adding students as members to that class so they can access those sets that you're adding in there. A file is somewhere you can organize your sets. I know I have hundreds, maybe even 1,000 sets by now. And so organizing sets is a really good way to keep on track of things, on top of things, and keep track of what I'm doing. And so for each year, I might change things a little bit about what's in my file for Latin 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but I want to create a class where I'm going to be adding sets from that file. I hope that made sense. Someone else asked, are language textbooks available in Quizlet? Yes, they are. My Latin textbooks that I use are available. So that's really cool. Someone said that when students are signing up with their classes, they're using strange names and they want them to use their real names. That's a really good question. So what I recommend is, even if my students have another Quizlet account, when they are signing up to my class, I have them use their school email addresses. That way I can keep track of who is in the class and who is not in the class. Someone asked about Google Classroom. Is it better to set up a class through Quizlet or Google Classroom? I would say, why do you need to do one or the other? Do both. I used Google Classroom for years and I had a Quizlet class as well. And so they're two different functions. I think Quizlet class is not an LMS, but what it is it's basically a way to curate sets for your students. So they're two different things. Okay, let's see. Okay. Heather asks, is there a way to have a minimum amount of questions to the online test? I think you can do up to 42, which is cool. But you like a minimum of 25. I would say that's between you and your students. I don't think there's a way to set it for your students, but certainly you can encourage them to do 25, because I think that's a great option. Let's see. I have time for maybe one more question. Someone says, are there suggestions for those teaching trimesters? Absolutely. I teach semester classes and I say semester 1 and semester 2 and give the dates. So your naming conventions can be whatever works for you. And as long as you have that file, you can add the same sets each trimester, which is great. I am so sorry that I ran out of time for you folks, but if you want to reach out via email or via social media, please feel free to do so. I am super happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon and have a great day.